Welcome, Wapham crew, guys, gals, ghouls, and otherworldly beings. Let's climb aboard the mothership, secure our tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in Cove, Colorado. I'm your hostess, TessaTNT, broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you're here. It's an honor to have you. And I'm so grateful that you like to listen to my show. If you want to listen in your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, you can listen to me under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker.com and wherever else you listen to your broadcasts and podcasts. It is officially spring, and I don't know about you, but where I live, it feels like full-on summer. It's insane. It was just freezing last week, so I decided to work in the dirt and plant some seeds and get all that ready. Instead of growing inside then taking them out, I'm just going to do it outside this year so they don't have to acclimate to the sun and all that other good stuff. I got a couple pecan trees coming in the mail. I try to find some larger ones because the sooner I get pecans, the better. But yeah, all you can find are little saplings. My desert peach that I planted last summer is actually sprouting leaves. I'm so excited. I don't know if it's going to fruit this year, but I'm just glad that it's doing good. It made it. I had a flowering pear that I had planted at one time, and it just grew, but it looked like it had some sort of virus on the leaves, and then all of a sudden it started not growing leaves up at the top, but it was growing out from the bottom. So yeah, that was just really weird. I don't know what was up with that. But yeah, I'm excited. I hope I have some peaches this year. I have big deal cucumbers planted. It says for salads and stuff, but I want to make them for like my spears. I'll use those. And then I did a pickle bush. So with those, I'll do like the full pickles in a jar. And I also planted cilantro. I planted some garlic that started sprouting in my kitchen, as well as some potatoes. So those have a head start as compared to the cucumbers and other things that I planted. Tomatoes, of course, because we love tomatoes. I have the big ones planted. They're called the big boy. And then also some Roma tomatoes, so I can make some pico de gallo. I planted some onions, as well as two different dills. One is a mammoth, so it's a giant dill plant with the fine leaves on it, you know, the regular dill that you actually see, and then another one that's a fern leaf dill. So I couldn't decide which one to plant or buy, so I decided to get them both. You know, we can mix it up in the pickling jar. Jalapenos, I got those planted, and I'm putting them in certain places as far as how much sunlight they need, who needs to be in the front row, who needs to be in the back. What else did I plant? Okra, because I want to pickle some okra. I feel like I'm forgetting something. I probably am, but ain't nobody got time for that. All right, so tonight we're doing story time with me, TessaTNT. Tonight we are going to be reading Scary Stories, illustrated by Barry Moser. Could be Moser, but I'm pretty sure it's Moser. But what do I know? I might remember some other things that I'm planting out there. And then the flower bed, which I have a kind of like a bed frame on it, the headboard and the footboard, which looks like brass, but I found a headboard and footboard that look almost exactly like it, except for it has porcelain balls on it that have flowers painted on it. So I thought that would look way better on the flower bed than the original one that I used, even though it just looks cool all around. And then the enclosed flower bed that I did half flowers and then half catnip and other things. Other flowers, zinnias, marigolds, different things that butterflies and bees like, so they can help me pollinate my plants. Alright, so the story that we left off on was The Squaw, page 62. It was a rudely shaped figure of a woman, something of the Bell Order, or, to make a closer comparison, of the figure of Mrs. Noah in the Children's Ark. But without that slimness of waist and perfect roundure of hip which marks the aesthetic type of the Noah family. One would hardly have recognized it as intended for a human figure at all, but not the founder's shaped. Wait, hold on. We're actually good with that story. Wait a tick. Sorry guys, let's rewind. The lottery. We're beginning a new story. Page 78. This story is by Shirley Jackson. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. Let me turn this down just a smidge as well. It's really loud. That's better. The flowers were blossoming profusely and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank. Around 10 o'clock, in some towns there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, and their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers, pronounces his name Delacroix, that's what I said, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking among themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. I gotta pause and blow my nose. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together, away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women, wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women standing by their husbands began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing, back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teenage club, and Halloween program by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business, and people were sorry for him because he had no children. His wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "A little late today, folks." Okay, so I had to stop and look it up because I have never heard that terminology before. His wife was a scold means his wife was a person who habitually used harsh, nagging, or abusive language, frequently finding fault and quarreling. Historically, this phrase described a woman who disturbed public peace with loud, abusive speech, often used to depict a nagging or shrewish wife in literature. All right, now that we got that out of the way, the postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square. Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool. And when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellas want to give me a hand?" there was a hesitation before 2 men, Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool, while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box was now resting on the stool, had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as... Hold on. Yeah. No one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it. The one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box. But every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything's being done. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them in the box, and it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square next morning. The rest of the year, the box was put away, sometimes one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves's barn and another year underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was set on a shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads of family, heads of households, and each family, members of each household and each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered there had been a recital of some sort performed by the official of the library, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Some people believe that the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he sang or sang it. Others believe that he was supposed to walk among them, but years and years ago this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. There had been also a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had had to use in addressing each person who came up to draw from the box. But this also had changed with time until now it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. Mr. Summers was very good at all this. In his clean white shirt and blue jeans, with one hand resting carelessly on the black box, he seemed very proper and important as he talked interminably to Mr. Graves and the Martins. Just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking and turned to the ensembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulder and slid into place in the back of the crowd. "Clean forgot what day it was," she said to Mrs. Delacroix, who stood next to her, and they laughed softly. "Thought my old man was out back stacking wood," Mrs. Hutchinson went on. "And then I looked out the window and the kids was gone, and then I remembered it was the 27th and came a-running." She dried her hands on her apron, and Mrs. Delacroix said, "You're in time, though. They're still talking away up there." Mrs. Hutchinson craned her neck to see through the crowd and found her husband and children standing near the front. She tapped Mrs. Delacroix on the arm as a farewell and began to make her way through the crowd. People separated good-humoredly to let her through. 2 or 3 people said in voices just loud enough to be heard across the crowd, "Here comes your Mrs. Hutchinson," and "Bill, she made it after all." Mrs. Hutchinson reached her husband, and Mr. Summers, who had been waiting, said cheerfully, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie." "Well, that's weird." Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, "Wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink, now would you, Joe?" And soft laughter ran through the crowd as the people stirred back into position after Mrs. Hutchinson's arrival. "Well, now," Mr. Summers said soberly, "guess we better get started. Get this over with, so we can go back to work. Anybody ain't here?" "Dunbar," several people said. "Dunbar, Dunbar." Mr. Summers consulted his list. "Clyde Dunbar," he said. "That's right. He's broke his leg, wasn't he?" "Who's drawing for him?" "Me, I guess," a woman said, and Mr. Summers turned to look at her. "Wife draws for her husband," Mr. Summers said. "Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie?" Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. Miss Summers waited with an expression of polite interest while Mrs. Dunbar answered. "Horses is not but 16 yet," Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. "Guess I gotta fill in for the old man this year." "Right," Mr. Summers said. He made a note on the list he was holding, then he asked, "Watson boy drawing this year?" A tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. "Here," he said. "I'm drawing for my mother and me." He blinked his eyes nervously and ducked his head as several voices in the crowd said a thing like, "Good fellow, Jack," and "Glad to see your mother's got a man to do it." I know it'd be so hard picking out a piece of paper now, wouldn't it? "Well," Mr. Summers said, "guess that's everyone." "Old Man Warner make it?" "Here," the voice said. Mr. Summers nodded. A sudden hush fell on the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat and looked at the list. "All ready?" he called. "Now I'll read the names, heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear?" The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, "Adams." The man disengaged himself from the crowd and came forward. "Hi, Steve." Mr. Summers engaged himself from the crowd and came forward. Mr. Summers said, and Mr. Adams said, "Hi, Joe." They grinned at one another humorously and nervously. Then Mr. Adams reached into the black box and took out a folded paper. He held it firmly by one corner as he turned and went hastily back to his place in the crowd, where he stood a little apart from his family, not looking down at his hand. "Allen," Mr. Summers said. "Anderson. Bentham." "Seems like there's no time at all between lotteries anymore," Mrs. Delacruz said to Mrs. Graves in the back row. "Seems like we got through with the last one only last week." "Time sure goes fast," Mrs. Graves said. "Clark, Delacroix." "There goes my old man," Mrs. Delacroix said. She held her breath while her husband went forward. "Dunbar," Mr. Summers said. And Mrs. Dunbar went steadily to the box while one of the women said, "Go on, Janie." And another said, "There she goes." "Where next?" Mrs. Graves said. She watched while Mr. Graves came around from the side of the box, greeting Mr. Summers gravely, and selected a slip of paper from the box. By now, all through the crowd, there were men holding the small folded papers in their large hands, turning them over and over nervously. Mrs. Dunbar and her two sons stood together, Mrs. Dunbar holding the slip of paper. "Harbert. Hutchinson." "Get up there, Bill," Mrs. Hutchinson said, and the people near her laughed. "Jones." "They do say," Mr. Adams said to Old Man Warner, who stood next to him, "that over in the North Village they're talking of giving up the lottery." Old Man Warner snorted. "Pack of crazy fools," he said. "Listening to the young folks, nothing's good enough for them. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back and living in caves, nobody work any more. Live that way for a while. Used to be a saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'd all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery," he added petulantly. "Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking with everybody." "Some places have already quit lotteries," Mrs. Adams said. "Nothing but trouble in that," Old Man Warner said stoutly. "Pack of young fools." Martin. Bobby Martin watched his father go forward. "Overdyke." "Percy." "I wish they'd hurry," Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. "I wish they'd hurry." They're almost through, her son said. You get ready to run, tell Dad, Mrs. Dunbar said. Mr. Summers called his own name and then stepped forward precisely and selected a slip from the box. Then he called, Warner. 77th year I've been in the lottery, Old Man Warner said as he went through the crowd. 77th time. Well, I'm going to pause there on the book and say that should be a winner. Winner, chicken dinner, 77. That should be a lucky number, shouldn't it? I do not know. Some people think 13 is a lucky number. Watson. The tall boy came awkwardly through the crowd. Someone said, Don't be nervous, Jack. And Mr. Summers said, Take your time, son. Zanini. After that, there was a long pause. A breathless pause until Mr. Summers, holding his slip of paper in the air, said, All right, fellas. For a minute no one moved, and then all the slips of paper were opened. Suddenly, all the women began to speak at once, saying, Who is it? Who got it? Is it the Dunbars? Is it the Watsons? Then the voices began to say, It's Hutchinson, it's Bill. Bill Hutchinson's got it. Go tell your father, Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. People began to look around to see the Hutchinsons. Bill Hutchinson was standing quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers, You didn't give him time enough to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair. Be a good sport, Tessie, Mrs. Delacruz called, and Mrs. Graves said, All of us took the same chance. Shut up, Tessie, Bill Hutchinson said. Well, everyone, Mr. Summers said, that was done pretty fast, and now we've got to be hurrying a little more to get it done in time. He consulted his next list. Bill, he said, you draw for the Hutchinson family. You got any other households in the Hutchinsons? There's Don and Ava, Mrs. Hutchinson yelled. Make them take their chance. Daughters draw with their husbands' families, Tessie, Mr. Summers said gently. You know that as well as anyone else. It wasn't fair, Tessie said. I guess not, Joe, Bill Hutchinson said regretfully. My daughter draws with her husband's family. That's only fair, and I've got no other family except the kids. Then as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you, Mr. Summers said in explanation. And as far as drawing for households is concerned, that's you too, right? Right, Bill Hutchinson said. How many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill said. There's Bill, Junior, and Nancy, and little Dave, and Tessie and me. All right, then, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you got their tickets back? Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. Put them in the box, then. Mr. Summers directed, Take Bill's and put it in. I think we ought to start over, Mrs. Hutchinson said as quietly as she could. I tell you it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that. Mr. Graves had selected the 5 slips and put them in the box, and he dropped all the papers but those onto the ground, where the breeze caught them and lifted them off. Listen, everybody, Mrs. Hutchinson was saying to the people around her. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked, and Bill Hutchinson, with one quick glance around at his wife and children, nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers said, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave. Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy who came willingly with him up to the box. Take the paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. Davy put his hand into the box and laughed. Take just one paper, Mr. Summers said. Harry, You hold it for him." Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it, while little Dave stood next to him and looked up at him wonderingly. "Nancy next," Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. "Bill Jr.," Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, nearly knocked the box over as he got a paper out. "Tessie," Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a minute, looking around defiantly, and then her lips were set and went up to the box. She snatched the paper out and held it behind her. "Bill," Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchinson reached into the box and felt around, bringing his hand out at last with a slip of paper in it. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, "I hope it's not Nancy," and the sound of the whisper reached the edges of the crowd. "It's not the way it used to be," Old Man Warner said clearly. "People ain't the way they used to be." "All right," Mr. Summers said. "Open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's." Mr. Graves opened the slip of paper, and there was a general sigh through the crowd as he held it up, and everyone could see that it was blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs at the same time, and both beamed and laughed, turning around to the crowd and holding their slips of paper above their heads. "Tessie," Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchinson, and Bill unfolded his paper and showed it. It was blank. "It's Tessie," Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. "Show us her paper, Bill." Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it, the black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with a heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchinson held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. "All right, folks," Mr. Summers said. "Let's finish quickly." Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. "Come on," she said. "Hurry up." Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, gasping for breath, "I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead and I'll catch up with you." The children had stones already, and someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. "It isn't fair," she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone." Steve Adams was in the front of the crowd of villagers, and Mrs. Graves beside him. "It isn't fair, it isn't right," Mrs. Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. Well, that was twisted. I wasn't expecting that. The Bus Conductor by E.F. Benson. My friend, Hugh Granger, and I had just returned from a 2 days visit in the country, where we had been staying in a house of sinister repute, which was supposed to be haunted by ghosts of a peculiarly fearsome and truculent sort. The house itself was all that such a house should be. Jacobean and oak-paneled, with long dark passages and high-vaulted rooms. It stood also very remote, and was encompassed by a wood of somber pines that muttered and whispered in the dark, and all the time that we were there, the south-westerly gale with torrents of scolding rain had prevailed. so that by the day and night weird voices moaned and fluted in the chimneys. A company of uneasy spirits held colloquy among the trees. And sudden tattoos and tappings beckoned from the window panes. But in spite of these surroundings, which were sufficient in themselves, one would almost say, to spontaneously generate occult phenomenon, nothing of any description had occurred. I am bound to add also that my own state of mind was peculiarly well adapted to receive or even to invent the sights and sounds we had gone to seek. For I was, I confess, during the whole time that we were there, in a state of abject apprehension, and lay awake both nights through the hours of terrified unrest, after afraid of the dark, yet more afraid of what a lighted candle might show me. Hugh Granger, on the evening after our return to town, had dined with me, and after dinner our conversation, as was natural, soon came back to these entrancing topics. "But why you go ghost seeking I cannot imagine," he said. "Because your teeth were chattering and your eyes starting out of your head all the time you were there, from sheer fright, or do you like being frightened?" Hugh, though generally intelligent, is dense in certain ways. This is one of them. "Why, of course I like being frightened," I said. "I want to be made to creep and creep and creep. Fear's the most absorbing and luxurious of emotions. One forgets all else if one is afraid." "Well, the fact that neither of us saw anything," he said, "confirms what I have always believed." "And what you have always believed?" "That these phenomena are purely objective, not subjective, and that one's state of mind has nothing to do with the perception that perceives them, nor have circumstances or surroundings anything to do with them either. Look at Osberton. It was and has had the reputation of being a haunted house for years, and it certainly has all the accessories of one. Look at yourself, too, with all your nerves on edge, afraid to look around or light a candle for fear of seeing something. Surely there was the right man in the right place then, if ghosts are subjective." He got up and lit a cigarette and looked at him. He was about 6 feet high and as broad as he is long. I felt a retort on my lips, for I could not help my mind going back to a certain period in his life, when from some cause which, as far as I knew, he had never told anybody, he had become mere quivering mass of disordered nerves. Oddly enough, at the same moment, and for the first time, he began to speak of it himself. "You may reply that it was not worth my while to go either," he said, "because I was so clearly the wrong man in the wrong place, but I wasn't. You, for all your apprehensions and expectancy, have never seen a ghost, but I have, though I am the last person in the world you would have thought likely to do so. Though my nerves are steady enough again now, it knocked me all to bits." He sat down again in his chair. "No doubt you remember my going to bits," he said, "and since I believe that I am sound again now, I should rather like to tell you about it. But before I couldn't speak of it at all to anybody. Yet there ought to have been nothing frightening about it. What I saw was certainly a most useful and friendly ghost, but it came from the shaded side of things. It looked suddenly out of the night and the mystery with which life is surrounded. I want first to tell you, quite shortly, my theory about ghost seeing," he continued, "but I can explain it best by a simile, an image. Imagine, then, that you and I and everybody in the world are like people whose eye is directly opposite a little tiny hole in a sheet of cardboard, which is continually shifting and revolving and moving about. Back to back with that sheet of cardboard is another, which also, by a law of its own, is in perpetual but independent motion. In it, too, there is another hole, and when fortuitously it would seem, these two holes, the one through which we are always looking and the other in the spiritual plane, come opposite one another, we see through. And then only do the sights and sounds of the spiritual world become visible or audible to us. With most people, these holes never come opposite each other during their life, but at the hour of death they do, and then they remain stationary. That, I fancy, is how we pass over. Now, in some natures, these holes are comparatively large and are constantly coming into opposition. Clairvoyants, mediums are like that, but as far as I knew, I had no clairvoyant or mediumistic powers at all. I therefore am the sort of person who long ago made up his mind that he never would see a ghost. It was, so to speak, an incalculable chance that my minute spy hole should come into opposition with the other. But it did, and it knocked me out of time. I had heard some such theory before, and though Hugh put it rather picturesquely, there was nothing in the least convincing or practical about it. It might be so, or again it might not. I hope your ghost was more original than your theory, said I, in order to bring him to the point. Yes, I think it was. You shall judge. I put on more coal and poked up the fire. Hugh has got, so I have always considered, a great talent for telling stories, and that sense of drama which is so necessary for the narrator. Indeed, before now I have suggested to him that he should take this up as a profession, sit by the fountain in Piccadilly Circus, when times are as usual bad, and tell stories to the passers-by in the street. Arabian fashion for reward. The most part of mankind, I am aware, do not like long stories, but to the few, among whom I number myself, who really like to listen to lengthy accounts of experiences, Hugh is an ideal narrator. I do not care for his theories or for his similes, but when it comes to facts, to things that happened, I like him to be lengthy. Go on, please, and slowly, I said. Brevity may be the soul of wit, but it is the ruin of storytelling. I want to hear when and where and how it all was, and what you had for lunch, and where you had dined, and what, he began. It was the 24th of June, just 18 months ago, he said. I had let my flat, you may remember, and came up from the country to stay with you for a week. We had dined alone here. I could not help interrupting. Did you see the ghost here? I asked, in this square little box of a house in a modern street. I was in the house when I saw it. I hugged myself in silence. We had dined alone here in Graham Street, he said, and after dinner I went out to some party and you stopped at home. At dinner your men did not wait, and when I asked where he was, you told me he was ill, and I thought changed the subject rather abruptly. You gave me your latchkey when I went out, and on coming back I found you had gone to bed. There were, however, several letters for me, which required answers. I wrote them there and then, and posted them at the pillar box opposite, so I suppose it was rather late when I went upstairs. You had put me in the front room on the third floor overlooking the street, a room which I thought you generally occupied yourself. It was a very hot night, and though there had been a moon when I started to my party, on my return the whole sky was cloud-covered, and it both looked and felt as if we might have a thunderstorm before morning. I was feeling very sleepy and heavy, and it was not till after I had got into bed that I noticed by the shadows of the window frames on the blind that only one of the windows was open, but it did not seem worthwhile to get out of bed in order to open it, so I felt rather airless and uncomfortable and I went to sleep. What time it was when I awoke I do not know, but it was certainly not yet dawn, and I never remember being conscious of such an extraordinary stillness as prevailed. There was no sound either of foot passengers or wheeled traffic. The music of life appeared to be absolutely mute. But now, instead of being sleepy and heavy, I felt, though I must have slept an hour or two at most, since it was not yet dawn, perfectly fresh and wide awake. The effort which had seemed not worth making before, that of getting out of bed and opening the other window, was quite easy now, and I pulled up the blind, threw it wide open, and leaned out, for somehow I parched and pinned for air. Even outside, the oppression was very noticeable, and though, as you know, I am not easily given to feel the mental effects of climate, I was aware of an awful creepiness coming over me. I tried to analyze it away, but without success. The past day had been pleasant. I looked forward to another pleasant day tomorrow, and yet I was full of some nameless apprehension. I felt, too, dreadfully lonely in the stillness before the dawn. Then I heard suddenly, and not very far away, the sound of some approaching vehicle. I could distinguish the tread of two horses walking at a slow foot's pace. They were, though not yet visible, coming up the street, and yet this indication of life did not abate that dreadful sense of loneliness which I have spoken of. Also, in some dim, unformulated way, that which was coming seemed to me to have something to do with the cause of my oppression. Then the vehicle came into sight. At first I could not distinguish what it was. Then I saw that the horses were black and had long tails, and that what they dragged was made of glass, but had a black frame. It was a hearse, empty. It was moving up this side of the street. It stopped at your door. Then the obvious solution struck me. You had said at dinner that your man was ill, and you were, I thought, unwilling to speak more about his illness. No doubt, so I imagine now, he was dead, and for some reason, perhaps because you did not want me to know anything about it, you were having the body removed at night. This, I must tell you, passed through my mind quite instantaneously, and it did not occur to me how unlikely it really was before the next thing happened. I was still leaning out of the window, and I remember also wondering, yet only momentarily, how odd it was that I saw things, or rather the one thing I was looking at, so very distinctly. Of course, there was a moon behind the clouds, but it was curious how every detail of the hearse and the horses was visible. There were There was only one man, the driver, with it, and the street was otherwise absolutely empty. It was at him I was looking now. I could see every detail of his clothes, but from where I was, so high above him, I could not see his face. He had on gray trousers, brown boots, a black coat buttoned all the way up, and a straw hat. Over his shoulder there was a strap which seemed to support some sort of little bag. He looked exactly like, well, from my description, what did he look like exactly? Why, a bus conductor, I said instantly. So I thought, and even while I was thinking this, he looked up at me. He had a rather long, thin face, and on his left cheek there was a mole with a growth of dark hair on it. All this was as distinct as if it had been noonday, and as if I was within a yard of him, but so instantaneous was all that takes so long in the telling. I had not time to think it strange that the driver of the hearse should be so unfunerally dressed. Then he touched his hat to me. and jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Just room for one inside, sir," he said. There was something so odious, so coarse, so unfeeling about this that I instantly drew my head in, pulled the blind down again, and then, for what reason I do not know, turned on the electric light in order to see what time it was. The hands of my watch pointed to 11:30. It was then, for the first time, I think, that a doubt crossed my mind as to the nature of what I just seen. But I put out the light again, got into bed, and began to think. We had dined. I had gone to a party. I had come back and written letters, had gone to bed, and had slept. So how could it be 11:30? Or what 11:30 was it? Then another easy solution struck me. My watch must have stopped, but it had not. I could hear it ticking. There was stillness and silence again. I expected every moment to hear muffled footsteps on the stairs, footsteps moving slowly and smallly under the weight of heavy burden. But from inside the house there was no sound whatever. Outside, too, there was the same dead silence, while the hearse waited at the door. And the minutes ticked on, and at length I began to see a difference in the light in the room, and knew that the dawn was beginning to break outside. How it had happened, then, that if the corpse was to be removed at night, it had not gone, and that the hearse still waited when morning was already coming. Presently I got out of bed again, and with a sense of strong physical shrinking, I went to the window and pulled back the blind. The dawn was coming fast. The whole street was lit by that silver, hueless light of morning, but there was no hearse there. Once again I looked at my watch. It was just 4:15, but I would swear that not half an hour had passed since it had told me that it was 11:30. Then a curious double sense, as if I was living in the present and at the same time had been living in some other time, came over me. It was dawn on June 25th, and the street was, as natural, was empty. But a little while ago the driver of a hearse had spoken to me, and it was 11:30. What was that driver? To what plane did he belong? And again, what 11:30 was it that I had been and seen recorded on the dial of my watch? And then I told myself that the whole thing had been a dream, but if you ask me whether I believe what I told myself, I would confess that I did not. Your man did not appear at breakfast next morning, nor did I see him again before I left that afternoon. I think if I had, I should have told you about all this, but it was still possible, you see, that what I had seen was a real hearse, driven by a real driver, for all the ghastly gaiety of the face that had looked up to mine, and the levity of his pointing hand. I might possibly have fallen asleep soon after seeing him, and slumbered through the removal of the body and the departure of the hearse, so I did not speak of it to you. There was something wonderfully straightforward and prosaic in all this. Here were no Jacobean houses, oak-paneled and surrounded by weeping pine trees, and somehow the very absence of suitable surroundings made the story more impressive. For a moment a doubt assailed me. "Don't tell me it was all a dream," I said. "I don't know whether it was or not. I can only say that I believe myself to have been wide awake. In any case, the rest of the story is odd. I went out of town again that afternoon," he continued, "and I may say that I don't think that even for a moment did I get the haunting sense of what I had seen or dreamed that night out of my mind. It was present to me always as some vision unfulfilled. It was as if some clock had struck the 4 quarters, and I was still waiting to hear what the hour would be. Exactly a month afterwards, I was in London again, but only for the day. I arrived at Victoria about 11 and took the Underground to Sloane Square in order to see if you were in town and would give me lunch. It was a baking hot morning, and I intended to take a bus from King's Road as far as Graham Street. There was one standing at the corner just as I came out of the station, but I saw that the top was full, and the inside appeared to be full also. Just as I came up to it, the conductor, who I suppose had been inside collecting fares or what not, came out onto the step within a few feet of me. He wore gray trousers, brown boots, a black coat buttoned, a straw hat, and over his shoulder was a strap on which hung his little machine for punching tickets. I saw his face, too. It was the face of the driver of the hearse, with the mole on the left cheek. Then he spoke to me, jerking his thumb over his shoulder. "Just room for one inside, sir," he said. At that, a sort of panic terror took possession of me, and I gesticulated wildly with my arms and cried, "No, no!" But at that moment I was living not in the hour that was then passing, but in that hour which had passed a month ago. When I leaned from the window of your bedroom here, just before the dawn broke, it was this moment I knew that my spy hole had been opposite the spy hole into the spiritual world. What I had seen there had some significance, now being fulfilled beyond the significance of the trivial happenings of today and tomorrow. The powers of which we know so little were visibly working before me, and I stood there on the pavement, shaking and trembling. I was opposite the post office at the corner, and just as the bus started, my eye fell on the clock in the window there. I need not tell you what the time was. Perhaps I need not tell you the rest, for you probably conjecture it, since you will now not have forgotten what happened at the corner of Sloane Square at the end of July, the summer before last. The bus pulled out from the pavement into the street in order to get round a van that was standing in front of it. At the moment there came down the King's Road a big motor, going at a hideously dangerous pace. It crashed full into the bus, burrowing into it as a gimlet burrows into a board. He paused. "And that's my story," he said. Thanksgiving by Joyce Carol Oates. Father spoke quietly. "We'll do the shopping for your mother, the turkey and all. You know she isn't feeling well." At once I asked, "What's wrong with her?" I thought I knew. Probably. It had been 3 days now. But the question was what any father would have expected of any daughter of 13. My voice, too, was a 13-year-old's, a scrawny sort of voice, drawling, skeptical. Father seemed not to hear. Hitched up his trousers, rattled the keys to the pickup as a man does who likes the feel of keys, the noisy rattle. "We'll just do it. We'll surprise her. Then it will be done." He counted on his fingers, smiling. "Thanksgiving is on Thursday, day after tomorrow. We'll surprise her so she can get started early." Yet there was a vagueness in his bubble-colored eyes that moved upon my scarcely seeing me, as if standing before him a long-legged skinny girl, all elbows and knees and pimples gritty as sand scattered across her forehead. I was no more to him than the horizon of scrub pine a short distance away, or the weather-worn fake beige brick asphalt siding on our house. Father nodded, grim and pleased. "Yes, she'll see." With a sigh, he climbed up into the truck on the driver's side, and I climbed up into the truck on the passenger side. It was just getting dark when he turned on the ignition. We needed to make a quick escape from our place before the dogs rushed out, yammering to be taken along. And sure enough, hearing us slam the truck doors, there came running Foxy, Tiki, Buck, hounds with some terrier blood in them, barking and whining after us. Foxy was my favorite, the one who loved me best, hardly more than a year old, but long-bodied and showing her ribs, big, wet, staring eyes like I'd broken her heart going away without her. But what the hell? You have to go to school without the damn dogs, and sometimes to church, and sure enough, you want to go to town without people smiling at you behind your back, figuring you as a country hick with dogs trailing after. Go on back, I yelled to the dogs, but they only yipped and fussed louder, running right alongside the pickup as Father took it out the drive, tossing up gravel in our wake. What a racket. I hoped Mother would not hear. I was feeling guilty seeing Foxy left behind, so I poked Father and asked, "Why don't we take them along in the back?" And Father said in a voice like he was talking to some fool, "We're going grocery shopping for your mother. Where's your sense?" Now we were out on the road, and Father had the gas pedal pressed down flat. The fenders of the old truck rattled. That weird, high-vibration started in the dashboard like a cricket. None of us could ever find to stop it. For the longest time, the dogs ran after us, Buck in the lead and Foxy second, long ears flapping, tongues out, like it was warm weather and not an almost freezing November day. A strange feeling came over me, hearing the dogs barking like that, loud and anxious, as they'd bark if they thought we were never coming back. Like, I wanted to laugh, but to cry too. Like, when you're tickled so hard it begins to hurt and whoever's doing it, tickling you, doesn't know the difference. Not that I was tickled anymore. I'm that old. I don't guess I'd been tickled in years. The dogs fell farther and farther behind till I couldn't see them anymore in the rearview mirror. Their barking faded too. Still Father was driving hard. Damn road was so rutted my teeth rattled in my head. I knew better, though, than to tell Father to slow down or even to switch on his headlights, which he did anyway a few minutes later. There was a mix of smells about him, tobacco and beer and that harsh-smelling steel gray soap he used to get the worst of the grease off his hands. And another smell, too, I couldn't name. Father was saying, like I'd been arguing with him, "Your mother is a good woman. She'll pull out of this." I didn't like that kind of talk. The age I was, you don't want to hear adults talk about other adults to you. So I made some kind of low, impatient mumble. Not that Father heard anyway. He wasn't listening. It was 11 miles to town, and once we got on the paved highway, Father kept the speedometer needle right at 60 miles per hour. Still, it seemed to take us a long time. Why would it take such a long time? I'd come out without my jacket, just wearing jeans and a plaid wool shirt and boots, so I was shivering. The sky was on fire behind the foothills and the mountains in the west. We had to drive over the long, shaky bridge across the Uville River that used to scare me so when I was little. I'd shut my eyes tight until we were on solid land. Except now I wouldn't let myself shut my eyes. I was too old for such cowardice. I think I knew that something was going to happen. In town, maybe, or when we returned home. Father drove straight down the middle of the highway, wrought iron, vibrating old bridge. Lucky no one was coming in the left lane. I could hear him mumbling to himself, like thinking aloud. Coupons? In the drawer? Jesus, forgot to look. I didn't say a word because it made me mad, either of them talking to themselves in my presence. Like somebody picking his nose and not seeing you're there. And I knew what Father was talking about, too. Mother kept shopping coupons in a kitchen drawer. She'd never go to the A&P without taking a batch of them along in her purse. Claimed she'd saved hundreds of dollars over the years. What I'd come to think was grown-up women like to fuss, clipping coupons out of newspaper ads or shoving their hands up into the elbows in some giant box of detergent or dog chow to fish out a coupon worth 12 cents. You figure it. For Thanksgiving, though, there'd be a lot of food coupons. Big savings on the turkey plus all the extras. But this year, there was nobody in our house to take the time to notice them, let alone cut them out of the ads and file them away. Driving to town is driving downhill, mainly, into the valley. Out of the foothills, where it always seemed colder, on the far side of the river, Uville looked squeezed in, steep streets, dropping down to the river, flat looking almost vertical at a distance. I was starting to get that nervous feeling I'd get sometimes when we came to town, and I guessed I wasn't dressed right or didn't look right. My face, my gnarly frizzy hair. Father made a wrong turn off the bridge ramp before I could stop him, so we had to drive through a neighborhood that didn't look familiar. Tall, narrow row of houses built to the sidewalk, some of them boarded up and empty, and not much traffic on the street. Here and there, old rusted, tireless hulks of cars at the curbs. There was a thickness to the air as of smoke and a smell of scourge. All that remained of the fiery sunset was a thin crescent in the west, very far away. The night coming on so fast made me shiver more, and there was the A&P, but what had happened? The smell of smoke and scorch was strong here. You could see that the front of the store was blackened, and the plate glass windows that ran the length of it had plywood inserts here and there. The posters advertising special bargains, bacon, bananas, turkey, cranberry, mix, eggs, porterhouse steak, had begun to peel off the glass, and the building itself looked smaller, not as high, as if the roof was sinking in. But there was movement inside. Lights were on, flickering, and not very bright, but they were on, and people were inside shopping. Father whistled through his teeth. Well, hell. I pulled into the parking lot. We'll do it, and get it done. There were only 5 or 6 cars in the lot, which looked different from what I remembered. More like raw earth with weeds growing in cracks, tall thistles. Beyond the parking lot, there wasn't anything familiar, no other buildings or houses, just dark. I whispered, I don't want to go in there. I'm afraid. But Father already had his door open, so I opened mine too and jumped down. The smell of smoke and burn was so strong here, my nostrils pinched and tears came into my eyes. There was another smell beneath it. Wet earth, decomposing matter, garbage. Grimly grinning, Father said, We'll have Thanksgiving like always. Nothing will change that. The automatic doors were not operating, so we had to open the inner door by hand, which took some effort. Inside, cold, damp air rushed at us, a smell as of the inside of a refrigerator that hadn't been cleaned in a long time. I stifled an impulse to gag. Father sniffed cautiously. Well, hell, he murmured again, as if it was a joke. The rear of the store was darkened, but there were lighted areas near the front, where a few shoppers, most of them women, were pushing carts. Of the 8 checkout counters, only 2 were open. The cashiers were women who looked familiar, but they appeared older than I'd remembered, white-lipped and frowning. Here we go, Father said with a broad forced smile, extricating a cart from a snarl of carts. We'll do this in record time. One of the cart's wheels stuck every few rotations, but Father pushed it hard and impatiently in the direction of the brightest lit part of the store, which happened to be the fresh produce section, where Mother always shopped first. How it was changed, though. Most of the bins and counters were bare, and some of them were broken. The aisles were partly blocked by mounds of decaying debris and plywood crates. There were puddles on the floor, flies buzzed groggily, a flushed-faced man in a soiled white uniform, a pork pie hat Johnny on his head declaring in red letters, "Bargain Holiday Buys." was snatching heads of lettuce out of a crate and dumping them in the bin so carelessly that some of the heads fell onto the filthy floor at his feet. Father pushed our cockeyed cart over to this man and asked him what the hell had happened here, a fire? But the man just smiled at him without looking at him, a quick, angry smile. "No, sir," he said, shaking his head. "Business as usual." Rebuffed, Father pushed the cart on. I could see his face reddening. Of all things, a man hates to be treated rudely by another man in the presence of one of his children. Father asked me how many people Mother would be cooking for on Thanksgiving, and between us we tried to count. Was it 8, 11, 15? I remembered, or thought I remembered, that Mother's older sister was coming this year with her family, husband and 5 children. But Father said no, they were not invited. Father said that Uncle Ryan would be sure to show up, like every year, but I told him no. Didn't he remember? Uncle Ryan was dead. Father blinked and drew his hand over his stubby jaw and laughed, his face reddened still more. "Geez, I guess so." So we counted, using all our fingers, but couldn't decide. Father said we would have to buy food for the largest number then, in case they all showed up. Mother would be so upset if something went wrong. Mother always shopped with a list neatly written in pencil. She'd keep it in plain view in her hand, sending me around the store getting items up and down the aisles, while she followed more slowly behind, getting the rest, examining prices. It was important to examine prices, she said, because they changed from week to week. Some items were on special and marked down, others were marked up. But a bargain was not a bargain if it was spoiled or rotten or just on the brink of being so. Suddenly, with no warning, Father gripped my arm. "Did you bring the list?" he asked. I told him no, and he pushed at me, as a child might do. "Why didn't you?" he asked. Father's face in the flickering light was oily, smudged, as if, despite the cold, he was sweating inside his clothes. "I never saw any list," I said meanly. "I don't know about any damn list." We had to get lettuce, though, if Mother was going to make a green salad. We had to get potatoes to be mashed and yams to be baked and cranberries for the sauce and a pumpkin for pie and apples for applesauce. We had to get carrots, lima beans, celery, but the best heads of lettuce I could find were wilted and brown and looked as if insects had been chewing on them. "Put them in the cart and let's move on," Father said, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. "I'll tell her it's the goddamn best we could do." Then he sent me running around, slipping on wet puddled floor, trying to find a dozen decent potatoes in a bin of mostly blackened ones, pumpkin that wasn't soft and beginning to stink, apples that weren't wizened and wormy. A plump-faced woman with bright orange lipstick and trembling hands was reaching for one of the last good pumpkins, but I slipped in under her arm and snatched it away. Open mouthed, the woman turned to stare at me. Did she know me? Did she know Mother? I pretended not to notice and hauled the pumpkin to our cart. The rear of the fresh produce section was blocked off because part of the floor had collapsed, so we had to turn around and retrace our route. Father cursed the grocery cart, which was sticking worse. What else did Mother need? Vinegar, flour, cooking oil, sugar, salt? Bread for the turkey stuffing? I shut my eyes tight, trying to envision our kitchen. The inside of the refrigerator that needed cleaning, the cupboard shelves where ants scurried in the dark. They were empty, weren't they, or nearly? It had been many days since Mother had shopped last. The quavering lights of the A&P were distracting. The sound of dripping close by, and Father speaking to me, his voice loud. "This aisle? Anything we need?" His breath was expelled in short, steaming pants. He squinted into the semi-darkness where the way was partly blocked by stacks of cartons, filling cans and packages. I told Father, "I don't want to," and Father told me, "Mother is counting on you, girl," and I heard myself sobbing an angry, ugly sound. "Mother's counting on you." But he gave me a nudge, and off I went, sliding on the floor, where water lay in pools 2 or 3 inches deep. My breath was steaming too. I groped quickly for things on the shelves, anything we might need. Mother would want canned applesauce since we wouldn't be bringing her fresh apples. Yes, and maybe creamed corn too, maybe canned spinach, beets, pineapple, green beans. And there, on a nearly empty shelf, were cans of tuna fish, bloated and leaking, giving off a powerful stink. Maybe I should take a few of these too for next week? And a big can of Campbell's pork and beans that Father loved. Hurry up! What's wrong? We haven't got all night. Father was calling at me through cupped hands from the far end of the aisle. I gathered up the canned goods as best I could, hugging them to my chest, but some fell. I had to stoop to pick them up out of the smelly water. "Goddamn you, girl. I said hurry up." I could hear the fear in Father's voice that I had never heard before. Shivering, I ran back to Father and dropped the cans in the cart, and we pushed forward. The next aisle was dark and partly blocked by loosely strung twine. There was a gaping hole in the floor about the size of a full-grown horse. Overhead, part of the ceiling was missing too. I could look up into the interior of the roof at the exposed girders. Rust-colored drops of water fell from girders heavy as shot. Here were fairly well-stocked shelves of detergent, dishwashing soap, toilet cleanser, aerosol, insect sprays, and ant traps. A woman in a green windbreaker was reaching beyond the blocked-off area to try to get a box of something, teetering on the edge of the hole, but her reach wasn't long enough. She had to give up. I hoped that Father wouldn't make me go down that aisle, but yes, he was pointing. He was determined. "She'll want soap, I guess, for dishes, laundry. Go on." So I knew I hadn't any choice. I slid along sideways as best I could around the edge of the hole, one foot and then the other, trying to make myself skinnier than I was, not daring to breathe. The rust-colored drops fell in my hair and on my face and hands. "Don't look down. Don't." I leaned over as far as I could, stretching my arm. My fingers reaching for a box of detergent. There was regular economy, giant, jumbo, jumbo giant. I took the economy because it was closest at hand and not too heavy, though it was heavy. I managed to get a box of dishwashing soap too, and made my way back to Father, who stood leaning against the cart, pressing a hand against his chest where he opened his jacket. I was clumsy, dropping the detergent into the cart so it broke, and a fine silvery acid-smelling powder spilled out onto the lettuce. Father cursed me and cuffed me so hard on the side of the head my ear rang, and I wondered if my eardrum had broken. Tears flooded into my eyes, but I'd be damned if I'd cry. I wiped my face on my shirt sleeve and whispered, "She doesn't want any of this shit. You know what she wants." Father slapped me again on the mouth this time. I rocked back on my heels and tasted blood. "You're the little shit," he said, furious. Father gave the cockeyed cart an angry push, and it lurched forward on 3 wheels. A 4th wheel was permanently stuck. I wiped my face again and followed after, thinking, what choice did I have? Mother was counting on me, maybe, if she was counting on anyone at all. Next was flour, sugar, salt, and next bakery products, where the shelves were mainly empty, but on the floor a few loaves of bread were lying soggy from the wet. Father grunted in resignation, and we picked them up and dropped them in the cart. Next then was the dairy products section, where a strong smell of spoiled milk and rancid butter prevailed. Father stared at pools of milk underfoot. His mouth worked, but he couldn't speak. I held my nose and plunged in, gathering up whatever I could find that wasn't spoiled, or anyway wasn't spoiled too badly. Mother would need milk, yes, and cream, yes, and butter, and lard, and eggs. We didn't raise chickens any longer. A chicken flu had carried them all away the previous winter, so we needed eggs. Yes, but I couldn't find a carton of 1 dozen eggs that was whole. I squatted on my haunches, breathing in little steamy spurts, examining eggs, taking a good egg, or anyway, what looked like a good egg, from one carton and putting it in another. I wanted at least 12, and this took time, and Father was standing a few yards away, so nervous, waiting I could hear him talking to himself, but not his actual words. I hope Father was not praying. It would have made me disgusted to hear. The age I was, you don't want to hear any adult, let alone your father, yes, and your mother, maybe most of all your mother, praying aloud to God to help them, because when you hear such a prayer, there won't be any help. Next to the dairy products was the frozen food section, where it looked as if some giant had smashed things down under his boot. The insides of the refrigerating units were exposed and twisted and gave off an ammonia-like stink. A young mother, fattish, tears on her cheeks, 3 small children in tow, was searching through mounds of frozen food packages, ice cream packages, while the children fretted and bawled. The cartons of ice cream were mainly melted, flat. The frozen food dinners must have been thawed, yet the younger mother was stooped over the packages, fussing and picking among them, sobbing quietly. I wondered, should I look too? We all liked ice cream, and the freezer at home was empty. Ice cream cartons lay in pools of melted ice cream amid something black that seemed to be quivering and seething, like rippling oil. I went to look closer, nudged a quart of raspberry ripple ice cream with my foot, and saw underneath a shiny scuttling of cockroaches. The young mother, panting, snatching up a carton of chocolate chip ice cream, shaking off cockroaches with a sound of disgust, but she put the carton in her shopping cart along with some others. She looked at me and smiled, kind of helpless, angry smile, that means. What can you do? I grinned back at her, wiping my sticky hands on my jeans, but I didn't want any of the ice cream. Thank you. Father hissed impatiently. Come on! He was shifting his weight from one leg to the other, like he had to go to the bathroom. So I brought the dairy things back best I could and put them in our cart, which was getting filled at last. Next, the meat department, where we had to get our Thanksgiving turkey if we were going to have a real Thanksgiving. This section, like the frozen food section, seemed to have been badly damaged. The counters spilled out onto the floor in a mess of twisted metal, broken glass, and spoiling meat. I saw chicken carcasses, coils of sausage like snakes, fat marbled steaks oozing blood. Here, too, the smell was overwhelming. Here, too, roaches were scuttling about, yet the butcher in his white uniform stood behind the remains of a glass counter, handing over a bloody package of meat to a woman with carrot-red hair and no eyebrows, a high school friend of Mother's whose name I did not know, who made a fool of herself, thanking him so profusely. Father was the next customer, so he stepped up to the counter, asking in a loud voice, where was the turkey? And the butcher smirked at him as if he'd asked a fool question. And Father said, louder yet, Mister, we'd like to get a good-sized bird, 20 pounds at least. My wife. The butcher was the store's regular butcher, familiar to me, yet changed. A tall, cadaverous man with sunken cheeks, part of his jaw missing, a single beady eye, bright with derison. His uniform was filthy with blood, and he, too, wore a jaunty pork pie hat with red letters proclaiming, Bargain Holiday Buys. Turkey's all gone, the butcher said meanly with satisfaction, except what's left back in the freezer. He pointed to a wall beyond a smashed meat counter, where there was a gaping hole, a kind of tunnel. You want to climb in there and get it, mister? You're welcome to it. Father stared at the hole and worked his mouth, but no sound came. I crouched, pinched my nostrils shut with my fingers, and tried to see inside where it was shadowy and dripping. And there were things, slabs of meat, carcasses, lying on a glistening floor, and something or someone moving. Father's face was dead white, and his eyes had shrunk in their sockets. He didn't speak, and I didn't speak, but we both knew he couldn't squeeze through a hole that size, even if he tried. Even I would have difficulty. So I drew a breath, and I said to Father, Okay, now I'll get the damn old turkey. screwed up my face a little, like a little kid, to hide how frightened I was, so he needn't know. I stepped over some debris and broken glass, got down on my hands and knees, in that smelly mess, and poked my head inside the opening. My heart was beating so hard I couldn't get my breath, and it scared me to think that I might faint like Mother. But at the same time, I knew I wasn't the kind of girl to faint. I'm strong. The opening was like a tunnel into a cave. How large the cave was, you couldn't see because the edges dissolved into darkness. The ceiling was low, though only a few inches above my head. Underfoot were puddles of bloody waste, animal heads, skins, intestines, but also whole sides of beef parts of a butchering pig, slabs of bacon, blood-stifled turkey carcasses, heads off, necks showing bristle and startlingly white raw bone. I thought that I would vomit, but I managed to control myself. There was one other shopper in here. A mother, the age of my mother, with steely gray hair in a bun, a good cloth coat with a fur collar, and the coat's hem was trailing in the mess, but the woman didn't seem to notice. She examined one turkey, rejected it, and examined another, rejected that, and examined another, finally settling upon a hefty bird which, with a look of grim triumph, she dragged back through the hole, which left me alone in the cave. Shaky, sickish, but excited. I could make out only 3 or 4 turkey carcasses remaining. I tried to sniff them, wondering were they beginning to get bad. Was one of them still fresh enough to be eaten? Squatting in bloody waste to my ankles. All my life that I could remember up to then, helping Mother in the kitchen, I'd been repulsed by the sight of turkey or chicken carcasses in the sink. The scrawny headless necks, the loose-seeming pale pimpled skin, the scaly clawy feet, and the smell of them, the unmistakable smell. Spooning stuffing rich with spices into the bird's scooped-out body, sewing the hole shut, basting with melted fat, roasting as dead, clammy meat turns to edible meat, as revulsion turns to appetite. How is it possible, you ask? The answer is, it is possible. The answer is, it is. The smells in the cave were so strong, I couldn't really judge which turkey was fresher than the other, so I chose the biggest bird remaining. A 20-pound bird at least. Panting now, half sobbing with effort, I dragged it to the opening, shoved it through and crawled after it myself. The lights in the store had seemed dim before, now seemed bright, and there was Father standing close by, hunched over the grocery cart waiting for me. His mouth agape, a twitchy smile at the corners of his lips. He was so surprised at something, the size of the turkey maybe, or just the fact of it, the fact that I'd done what I'd done, blinking up, grinning at him, wiping my filthy hands on my jeans. As I stood to my full height, he couldn't even speak at first, and was slow to help me lift the turkey into the cart. Then weakly he said, "Well, hell!" The store was darkening, only one cashier remaining to ring up our purchases. Outside it was very dark. No moon and a light snow falling, the first snowfall of the year. Father carried the heavier grocery bags. I carried the lighter to the truck, where we placed them in the rear and dragged a tarpaulin over them. Father was breathing harshly, his face still unnaturally white, so I wasn't surprised when he told me he wasn't feeling all that good and maybe shouldn't drive home. This was the first time ever I'd been a witness to any adult saying any such thing, but somehow I wasn't surprised, and when Father gave me the key to the ignition, I liked the feel of it in my hand. I climbed up into the truck, Father in the passenger seat, pressing his fist against his chest, me in the driver's seat behind the high wheel. I was only just tall enough to see over the wheel and the hood. I'd never driven any vehicle before, but I'd watched them, him and her, over the years, so I knew how. Alright guys, I had to paused to blow my nose, and I can't remember if I read the title or the author of this next story, so I'm going to do it again. And I'm sick and I don't feel good, and I keep feeling nauseous. Even though it's mainly a cold, it could be the freaking medicine I had to take. I hate taking medicine. But if I didn't take it, my nose would be running profusely, constantly. Excerpt from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. It was the very witching time of night that Ichabod, heavy-hearted and crestfallen, pursued his travels homewards, along the sides of the lofty hills which rise above Tarrytown, and which he had traversed so cheerily in the afternoon. The hour was as dismal as himself. Far below him, the Tappan Zee spread its dusky and indistinct waste of waters, with here and there the tall mast of a sloop, riding quietly at anchor under the land. In the dead hush of midnight, he could even hear the barking of the watchdog from the opposite shore of the Hudson, but it was so vague and faint as only to give an idea of his distance from his faithful companion of man. Now and then, too, the long-drawn crowing of a cock, accidentally awakened, would sound far, far off, from some farmhouse away among the hills, but it was like a dreaming sound in his ears. No signs of life occurred near him, but occasionally the melancholy chirp of a cricket, or perhaps the guttural twang of a bullfrog from a neighboring marsh, as if sleeping uncomfortably and turning suddenly in his bed. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that he had heard in the afternoon now came crowding upon his recollection. The night grew darker and darker, the stars seemed to sink deeper in the sky, and driving clouds occasionally hid them from his sight. He had never felt so lonely and dismal. He was, moreover, approaching the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid. In the center of the road stood an enormous tulip tree, which towered like a giant above all the other trees in the neighborhood, and formed a kind of landmark. Its limbs were gnarled and fantastic, large enough to form trunks for ordinary trees, twisting down almost to the earth and rising again into the air. It was connected with the tragical story of the unfortunate André, who had been taken prisoner hard by and was universally known by the name of Major André's tree. Common people regarded it with a mixture of respect and superstition, partly out of sympathy for the fate of its ill-starred namesake, and partly from the tales of strange sights and doleful lamentations told concerning it. As Ichabod approached this fearful tree, he began to whistle. He thought his whistle was answered. It was but a blast of sweeping sharply through the dry branches. As he approached a little nearer, he thought he saw something white hanging in the midst of the tree. He paused and ceased whistling, but on looking more narrowly, perceived that it was a place where the tree had been scathed by lightning, and the white wood lay bare. Suddenly he heard a groan. His teeth chattered, and his knees smote against the saddle. It was but the rubbing of one huge bough upon another as they were swaying about by the breeze. He passed the tree in safety, but new perils lay before him. About 200 yards from the tree, a small brook crossed the road and ran into a marshy and thickly wooded glen, known by the name of Wily Swamp. A few rough logs, laid side by side, served for a bridge over the stream. On that side of the road where the brook entered the wood, a group of oaks and chestnuts matted thick with wild grapevines threw a cavernous gloom over it. Past this bridge was the severest trial. It was at this identical spot that the unfortunate André was captured. and under the covert of these chestnuts and vines were the sturdy yeoman concealed whom surprised him. This has ever since been considered a haunted stream, and fearful are the feelings of the schoolboy who has to pass it alone after dark. As he approached the stream, his heart began to thump. He summoned up, however, all his resolution, gave his horse half a score of kicks in the ribs, and attempted to dash briskly across the bridge, but instead of starting forward, the perverse old animal made a lateral movement and ran broadside against the fence. Ichabod, whose fears increased with the delay, jerked the reins on the other side and kicked lustily with the contrary foot. It was all in vain. His steed started, it is true, but it was only to plunge to the opposite side of the road into the thicket of brambles and alder bushes. The schoolmaster now bestowed both whip and heel upon the starveling ribs of the little gunpowder, who dashed forward, snuffling and snorting, but came to a stand just by the bridge, with the suddenness that had nearly sent his rider sprawling over his head. Just at this moment, a plashy tramp by the side of the bridge caught the sensitive ear of Ichabod. In the dark shadow of the grove, on the margin of the brook, he beheld something huge, misshapen and towering. It stirred not, but seemed gathering up in the gloom like some gigantic monster, ready to spring upon the traveler. The hair of the affrighted pedagogue rose upon his head with terror. What was to be done? To turn and fly was now too late, and besides, what chance was there of escaping ghost or goblin, if it was, which could ride upon the wings of the wind? Summoning up, therefore, a show of courage, he demanded in stammering accents, "Who are you?" He received no reply. He repeated his demand in a still more agitated voice. Still there was no answer. Once more he cuckolded the sides of the inflexible gunpowder, and, shutting his eyes, broke forth with involuntary fervor into a psalm tune. Just then the shadowy object of alarm put itself in motion, and with a scramble and a bound stood at once in the middle of the road. Though the night was dark and dismal, yet the form of the unknown might now in some degree be ascertained. Excuse me. He appeared to be a horseman of large dimensions, and mounted on a black horse of powerful frame. He made no offer of molestation or social ability, but kept aloof on one side of the road, jogging along on the blind side of old Gunpowder, who had now got over his fright and waywardness. Ichabod, who had no relish for this strange midnight companion, and bethought himself of the adventure of Brombones with a galloping Hessian, now quickened his steed in hopes of leaving him behind. The stranger, however, quickened his horse to an equal pace. Ichabod pulled up and fell into a walk, thinking to lag behind. The other did the same. His heart began to sink within him. He endeavored to resume his psalm tune, but his parched tongue clove to the roof of his mouth, and he could not utter a pertinacious companion. But he could not utter a stave. There was something in the moody and dogged silence of this pertinacious companion that was mysterious and appalling. It was soon fearfully accounted for. On mounting a rising ground which brought the figure of his fellow traveler in relief against the sky, gigantic in height and muffled in a cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was still more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. His terror rose to desperation. He rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, hoping by a sudden movement to give his companion the slip. But the spectre started full jump with him. Away, then they dashed through the thick and thin, stones flying and sparks splashing at every every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lank body away over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. They had now reached the road which turns off to Sleepy Hollow, but Gunpowder, who seemed possessed with a demon instead of keeping up it, made an opposite turn and plunged headlong downhill to the left. This road leads through a sandy hollow shaded by trees for about a quarter of a mile, where it crosses the bridge famous in Goblin story, and just beyond swells the green knoll on which stands the whitewashed church. As yet the panic of the steed had given his unskilful rider an apparent advantage in the chase, but just as he had got halfway through the hollow, the girths of the saddle gave way, and he felt it slipping from under him. He seized it by the pommel and endeavored to hold it firm, but in vain, and had just time to save himself by clasping old Gunpowder round the neck when the saddle fell to the earth, and he heard it trampled underfoot by his pursuer. For a moment the terror of Hans van Ripper's wrath passed across his mind, for it was his Sunday saddle. But this was no time for petty fears. The goblin was hard on his haunches, and, unskilful rider that he was, he had much ado to maintain his seat, sometimes slipping on one side, sometimes on another, and sometimes jolted on the high ridge of his horse's backbone, with a violence that he verily feared would cleave him asunder. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. The wavering reflection of a silver star in the bosom of the brook told him that he was not mistaken. He saw the walls of the church dimly glaring under the trees beyond. He recollected the place where Brom Bones' ghostly competitor had disappeared. "If I can but reach that bridge," thought Ichabod, "I am safe." Just then he heard the black steed panting and blowing close behind him. He even fancied that he felt his hot breath. Another convulsive kick in the ribs, and old Gunpowder sprang upon the bridge. He thundered over the resounding planks. He gained the opposite side, and now Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish, according to rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, and in the very act of hurling his head at him, Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash. He was tumbled headlong into the dust, and Gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by like a whirlwind. The next morning the old horse was found without his saddle and with the bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. Ichabod did not make his appearance at breakfast. Dinner hour came, but no Ichabod. The boys assembled at the schoolhouse and strolled idly about the banks of the brook, but no schoolmaster. Hans van Ripper now began to feel some uneasiness about the fate of poor Ichabod and his saddle. An inquiry was set on foot, and after diligent investigation they came upon his traces. In one part of the road leading to the church was found the saddle trampled in the dirt. The tracks of horse hoofs, deeply dented in the road, and evidently at furious speed, were traced to the bridge, beyond which, on the bank of a broad part of the brook, where the water ran deep and black, was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close behind it a shattered pumpkin. The Terrible Old Man by H.P. Lovecraft. It was the design of Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silva to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea, and is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the profession of Messrs. Ricci, Zanuck, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery. inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man which generally keep him safe from the attention of gentlemen like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides a fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musty and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of East India clipper ships in his day, so old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. Among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted so that they resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away most of the small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small paned windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles, but there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk who sometimes steal up to the house to peer in through the dusty panes. These folks say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, in which a small piece of lead suspended pendulum wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles in addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Mate Ellis, and that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations as if it is answering. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again, but Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were of that new and heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions. And they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless gray beard, could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane, and whose thin, weak hands shook pitifully. They were really quite sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow whom everybody shunned, and at whom all the dogs barked singularly. But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession there is a lure and a challenge about a very old and very feeble man who has no account at the bank and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. Messrs. Ricci and Zanuck and Silva selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ricci and Mr. Silva were to interview the poor old gentleman while Mr. Zanuck waited for them in their presumable metallic burden with a cover motor car in Ship Street, by the gate in the tall rear of the wall, their host's grounds. Desire to avoid the needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions prompted these plans for a quiet and unostentatious departure. As prearranged, the 3 adventurers started out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicion afterward. Messrs. Ricci and Silva met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon shone down upon the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to think about than mere idle superstition. They feared it might be unpleasant work making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver, for H.C. captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ricci and Silva were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons voluble, and the screams of a weak and unexceptionally vulnerable man can be easily muffled, so they moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Zanuck as he fidgeted restlessly in the covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the deed. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously he watched that narrow oaken gate in the high and ivy-clad stone wall. Frequently he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his treasure was hidden, and had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Zanuck did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place. Then he sensed a soft tread or tapping on the walk inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street light, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of that sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he had expected. For his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Zanuck had never before noticed the color of that man's eyes. Now he saw that they were yellow. Excuse me. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason that Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses and horribly mangled as by the tread of many cruel boot heels, which the tide washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in Ship Street, or certain especially inhuman cries, probably of stray animal or migratory bird, heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village gossip, the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth. John Carrington's Wedding by E. Nesbit. No one ever thought that May Forster would marry John Carrington, but he thought differently, and things which John Carrington intended had a queer way of coming to pass. He asked her to marry him before he went up to Oxford. She laughed and refused him. He asked her again next time he came home. Again she laughed, tossed her dainty blonde head, and again refused. The third time he asked her, she said it was becoming a confirmed bad habit, and laughed at him more than ever. John was not the only man who wanted to marry her. She was the belle of our village, courtier, and we were all in love with her, more or less. It was a sort of fashion, like a heliotrope ties or Inverness capes. Therefore, we were as much annoyed as surprised when John Carrington walked into our little local club. We held it in a loft over the Sadlers, I remember, and invited us all to his wedding. Your wedding? You don't mean it. Who's the happy pair? When's it to be? John Carrington filled his pipe and lighted it before he replied. Then he said, I am sorry to deprive you fellows of your only joke, but Miss Forster and I are to be married in September. You don't mean it. He's got the mitten again, and it's turned his head. No, I said, rising. I see it's true. Lend me a pistol, someone, or a first-class fare to the other end of nowhere. Carrington has bewitched the only pretty girl in our 20-mile radius. Was it mesmerism Or a love potion, Jack? Neither, sir, but a gift you'll never have. Perseverance, and the best luck a man ever had in this world. There was something in his voice that silenced me, and all chaff of the other fellows failed to draw him further. The queer thing about it was that when we congratulated Miss Forster, she blushed and smiled and dimpled for all the world as though she were in love with him, and had been in love with him all the time. Upon my word, I think she had. Women are strange creatures. We were all asked to the wedding. In Brixham, everyone who was anybody knew everybody else who was anyone. My sisters were, I truly believe, more interested in the trousseau than the bride herself, and I was to be the best man. Coming marriage was much canvassed at afternoon tea tables and at our little club over the Sadlers, and the question was always asked, does she care for him? I used to ask that question myself in the early days of their engagement, but after a certain evening in August, I never asked it again. I was coming home from the club through the churchyard. Our church is on a time-grown hill, and the turf about it is so thick and soft that one's footsteps are noiseless. I made no sound as I vaulted the low, lichened wall and threaded my way between the tombstones. It was at the same instant that I heard John Carrington's voice and saw her. May was sitting on a low, flat gravestone, her face turned towards the full splendor of the western sun. Its expression ended at once and forever any question of love for him. It was transfigured to a beauty I should not have believed possible, even to that beautiful little face. John lay at her feet, and it was his voice that broke the stillness of the golden August evening. My dear, I believe I should come back from the dead if you wanted me. I coughed at once to indicate my presence and passed on into the shadow fully enlightened. The wedding was to be early in September, 2 days before I had to run up to town on business. The train was late, of course, for we are on the southeastern, and as I stood grumbling with my watch in my hand, whom should I see but John Carrington and May Forster? They were walking up and down the unfrequented end of the platform, arm in arm, looking into each other's eyes, careless of the sympathetic interest of the porters. Of course, I knew better than to hesitate a moment before burying myself in the booking office, and it was not till the train drew up at the platform that I obtrusively passed the pair with my Gladstone and took the corner in the first-class smoking carriage. I did this with as good an air of not seeing them as I could assume. I pride myself on my discretion, but if John were traveling alone, I wanted his company, and I had it. "Hello, old man," came his cheery voice as he swung his bag into my carriage. "Here's luck. I was expecting a dull journey." "Where are you off to?" I asked. Discretion still biting me, turned my eyes away, though I saw without looking that hers were red-rimmed. "To old Branbridge's," he answered, shutting the door and leaning out for a last word with his sweetheart. "Oh, I wish you wouldn't go, John," she was saying in a low, earnest voice. "I feel certain something will happen." "Do you think I should let anything happen to keep me, and the day after tomorrow our wedding day?" "Don't go," she answered with a pleading intensity which would have sent my Gladstone onto the platform and me after it. But she wasn't speaking to me. John Carrington was made differently. He rarely changed his opinion, never his resolutions. He only stroked the little ungloved hands that lay on the carriage door. "I must, May. The old boy's been awfully good to me, and now he's dying I must go and see him, but I shall come home in time for. The rest of the parting was lost in a whisper in the rattling lurk of the starting train. You sure to come? She spoke as the train moved. Nothing shall keep me, he answered, and we steamed out. After he had seen the last of the little figure on the platform, he leaned back in his corner and kept silent for a minute. When he spoke, it was to explain to me that his godfather, whose heir he was, lay dying at Peace Marsh Place, some 50 miles away, and had sent for John, and John had felt bound to go. I shall be surely back tomorrow, he said, or if not, the day after, in heaps of time. Thank heaven. One hasn't to get up in the middle of the night to get married nowadays. And suppose Mr. Branbridge dies? Alive or dead, I mean to be married on Thursday, John answered, lighting a cigar and unfolding the Times. At Peace Marsh Station we said goodbye, and he got out and I saw him ride off. I went on to London, where I stayed the night. When I got home the next afternoon, a very wet one, by the way, my sister greeted me with, "Where's Mr. Carrington?" "Goodness knows," I answered testily. Every man since Cain has resented that kind of question. "I thought you might have heard from him," she went on, "as you're to give him away tomorrow." "Isn't he back?" I asked, for I had confidently expected to find him at home. "No, Geoffrey." My sister Fanny always had a way of jumping to conclusions, especially such conclusions as were least favorable to her fellow creatures. "He has not returned, and what is more, you may depend upon it, he won't. You mark my words, there'll be no wedding tomorrow." My sister Fanny has a power of annoying me which no other human being possesses. "You mark my words," I retorted with asperity. "You had better give up making such a thundering idiot of yourself. There'll be more wedding tomorrow than ever you'll take the first part in." Prophecy which, by way, came true. But though I could snarl confidently to my sister, I did not feel so comfortable when late that night I, standing on the doorstep of John's house, heard that he had not returned. I went home gloomily through the rain. Next morning brought a brilliant blue sky, gold sun, and all such softness of air and beauty of cloud as go to make up a perfect day. I woke with a vague feeling of having gone to bed anxious, and of being rather averse to facing that anxiety in the light of full wakefulness. But with my shaving water came a note from John which relieved my mind and sent me up to the Forsters with a light heart. May was in the garden. I saw her blue gown through the hollyhocks as the lodge gate swung to behind me. So I did not go up to the house, but turned aside down the turfed path. "He's written to you, too," she said, without preliminary greeting, when I reached her side. "Yes, I'm to meet him at the station at 3 and come straight on to the church." Her face looked pale, but there was a brightness in her eyes and a tender quiver about the mouth that spoke of renewed happiness. "Mr. Bainbridge begged him so to stay another night that he had not the heart to refuse," she went on. "He is so kind, but I wish he hadn't stayed." I was at the station at 2:30. I felt rather annoyed with John. It seemed a sort of slight to the beautiful girl who loved him that he should come as if were out of breath and with the dust of travel upon him, to take her hand, which some of us would have given the best years of our lives to take. But when the 3 o'clock train glided in and glided out again, having brought no passengers to our little station, I was more than annoyed. There was no other train for 35 minutes. I calculated that, with much hurry, we might just get to the church in time for the ceremony. But, oh, what a fool to miss that first train. What other man could have done it? That 35 minutes seemed a year as I wandered around the station reading the advertisements and the timetables and the company's bylaws and getting more and more angry with John Carrington. This confidence in his own power of getting everything he wanted the minute he wanted it was leading him too far. I hate waiting, everyone does, but I believe I hate it more than anyone else. The 35 minutes was late, of course. The 3:35 was late, of course. "Drive to the church," I said as someone shut the door. "Mr. Carrington hasn't come by his train." I grind my pipe between my teeth and stamped with impatience as I watched the signals. Click. The signal went down. 5 minutes later, I flung myself into the carriage that I had brought for John. Anxiety now replaced anger. What had become of the man? Could he have been taken suddenly ill? I had never known him to have a day's illness in his life. And even so, he might have telegraphed. Some awful accident must have happened to him. The thought that he had played her false never, no, not for a moment, entered my head. Yes, something terrible had happened to him, and on me lay the task of telling his bride. I almost wished the carriage would upset and break my head so that someone else might tell her, not I. Who? But that's nothing to do with this story. It was 5 minutes to 4 as we drew up to the churchyard gate. A double row of eager onlookers lined the path from gate to porch. I sprang from the carriage and passed up between them. Our gardener had a good front place near the door. I stopped. "Are they waiting still, Biles?" I asked, simply to gain time, for of course I knew they were by the waiting crowd's attentive attitude. "Waiting, sir? No, sir. Why, it must be over by now." "Over? Then Mr. Carrington's come?" "Wait a minute, sir. Must have missed you somehow, and I say, sir," lowering his voice, "I never see Mr. John the least bit so afore, but my opinion is he's been drinking pretty free. His clothes was all dusty and his face like a sheet. I tell you, I didn't like the looks of him at all. And the folks inside are saying all sorts of things. You'll see, something's gone very wrong with Mr. John, and he's tried liquor. He looked like a ghost, and in he went with his eyes straight before him, with never a look or a word for none of us. Him, that was always such a gentleman." I had never heard Biles make so long a speech. The crowd in the churchyard were talking in whispers and getting ready rice and slippers to throw at the bride and bridegroom. The ringers were ready with their hands on the ropes to ring out the merry peal as the bride and bridegroom should come out. A murmur from the church announced them. Out they came. Biles was right. John Carrington did not look himself. There was dust on his coat, his hair was disarranged. He seemed to have been in some row, for there was a black mark above his eyebrow. He was deathly pale, but his pallor was not greater than that of the bride, who might have been carved in ivory. Dress, veil, orange blossoms, face and all. As they passed out, the ringers stooped. There were 6 of them, and then on the ears, expecting the gay wedding peal, came the slow tolling of the passing bell. A thrill of horror at so foolish a jest from the ringers passed through us all. But the ringers themselves dropped the ropes and fled like rabbits out into the sunlight. The bride shuddered, and gray shadows came about her mouth, but the bridegroom led her on down the path where the people stood with handfuls of rice. But the handfuls were never thrown, and the wedding bells never rang. In vain the ringers were urged to remedy their mistake. They protested with many whispered expletives that they would see themselves further first. In a hush like the hush in the chamber of death, the bridal pair passed into their carriage and its door slammed behind them. Then the tongues were loosed, a babble of anger, wonder, conjecture from the guests and spectators. "If I'd seen his condition before," said old Forster to me as we drove off, I would have stretched him on the floor of the church, sir, by heaven I would, before I'd have let him marry my daughter. Then he put his head out of the window. "Drive like hell," he cried to the coachman. "Don't spare the horses." He was obeyed. We passed the bride's carriage. I forbore to look at it, and old Forster turned his head away and swore. We reached home before it. We stood in the doorway in the blazing afternoon sun, and in about half a minute we heard wheels crunching the gravel. When the carriage stopped in front of the steps, old Forster and I ran down. Great heaven, the carriage is empty, and yet I had the door open in a minute, and this is what I saw. No sign of John Carrington, and of May, his wife, only a huddled heap of white satin, lying half on the floor of the carriage and half on the seat. "I drove straight here, sir," said the coachman, as the bride's father lifted her out, "and I'll swear no one got out of the carriage." We carried her into the house in her bridal dress and drew back her veil. I saw her face. Shall I ever forget it? White and drawn with such agony and horror, bearing such a look of terror as I have never seen since except in dreams. And her hair, her radiant blonde hair, I tell you it was white like snow. As we stood, her father and I, half mad with the horror and mystery of it, a boy came up the avenue, telegraph boy. He brought the orange envelope to me. I tore it open. Mr. Carrington was thrown from the dog-cart on his way to the station at 1:30, killed on the spot. And he was married to May Forster in our parish church at 3:30 in presence of half the parish. I shall be married, dead or alive. What had passed in that carriage on the homeward drive, no one knows. No one will ever know. Oh, May, oh, my dear. Before a week was over, they laid her beside her husband in our little churchyard on the thyme-covered hill, the churchyard where they had kept their love trysts. Thus was accomplished John Carrington's wedding. The Furnished Room by O. Henry. Restless, shifting, fugacious, as time itself is a certain vast bulk of population of red brick district of the lower west side. Homeless, they have 100 homes. They flit from furnished room to furnished room, transients forever, transient in abode, transient in heart and mind. They sing Home Sweet Home in ragtime. They carry their lairs at the knots in a bandbox. Their vine is entwined about a picture hat. A rubber plant is their fig tree. Hence the houses of this district, having had 1,000 dwellers, should have 1,000 tales to tell. Mostly dull ones, no doubt, but it would be strange if there could not be found a ghost or two in the wake of all these vagrant guests. One evening after dark, a young man prowled among these crumbling red mansions, ringing their bells. At the 12th he rested his lean hand baggage upon the step and wiped the dust from his hatband and forehead. The bell sounded faint and far away in some remote hollow depths. To the door of this, the 12th house, whose bell had hung and rung, came a housekeeper who made him think of an unwholesome, surfeited worm that had eaten its nut to a hollow shell and now sought to fill the vacancy with edible lodgers. He asked if there was a room to let. "Come in," said the housekeeper. Her voice came from her throat. Her throat seemed lined with fur. "I have the 3rd floor back, vacant since a week back, should you wish to look at it." The young man followed her up the stairs. Faint light from no particular source mitigated the shadows of the halls. They trod noiselessly upon a stair carpet that its own loom would have forsworn. It seemed to have become vegetable, to have degenerated into that rank, sunless air to the lush lichen or spreading moss that grew in patches to the staircase and was viscid under the foot like organic matter. At each turn of the stairs were vacant niches in the wall. Perhaps plants had once been set within them. If so, they had died in that foul and tainted air. It may be that the statues of the saints had stood there, but it was not difficult to conceive that imps and devils had dragged them forth in the darkness and down to the unholy depths of some furnished pit below. "This is the room," said the housekeeper from her furry throat. "It's a nice room. It ain't often vacant. I had some most elegant people in this last summer. No trouble at all, and paid in advance to the minute. The Waters, a vulturous vaudeville sketch. The Waters at the end of the hall, sprawls the moon he kept it 3 months. They done a vaudeville sketch. Miss Bretta Sproles. You may have heard of her. Oh, that was just the stage names. Right there over the dresser is where the marriage certificate hung, framed. The gas is here, and you see there is plenty of closet room. It's a room everybody likes. It never stays idle long." "Do you have many theatrical people rooming here?" asked the young man. "They comes and goes. A good portion of my lodgers is connected with the theaters. Yes, sir, this is the theatrical district. Actor people never stays long anywhere. I get my share, yes. They comes and they goes." He engaged the room, paying for a week in advance. He was tired, he said, and would take possession at once. He counted out the money. The room had been made ready, she said, even the towels and water. As the housekeeper moved away, he put, for the thousandth time, the question that he carried at the end of his tongue. "A young girl, Miss Vashner, Miss Eloise Vashner. Do you remember such a one among your lodgers?" "She would be singing on the stage, most likely, a fair girl of medium height and slender, with reddish gold hair and a dark mole near her left eyebrow." "No, I don't remember the name. Them stage people has names they change as often as the rooms. They comes and they goes. No, I don't call that one to mind." "No, always no. 5 months of ceaseless interrogation and the inevitable negative. So much time spent by day in the questioning managers, agents' rooms, and choruses. By night among the audiences of theaters from all-star casts down to music halls so low that he dreaded to find what he most hoped for. He who had loved her best had tried to find her. He was sure that since her disappearance from home this great, water-girt city held her somewhere. But it was like a monstrous quicksand, shifting its particles constantly, with no foundation, its upper granules of today buried tomorrow in ooze and slime. The furnished room received its latest guest with the first glow of pseudo-hospitality, a hectic, haggard, perfunctory welcome like the specious smile of a demerep. The sophistical comfort came in reflecting gleams from the decaying furniture, the ragged brocade upholstery of a couch and 2 chairs, a foot-wide cheap cured glass between the 2 windows from 1 or 2 gilt picture frames and a brass bedstead in a corner. The guest reclined inert upon a chair while the room, confused in speech as though it were an apartment in Babel, tried to discourse him of its diverse tenantry. Polychromatic rug, like some brilliant flowered rectangular tropical islet, lay surrounded by billowy sea of soiled matting. Upon the gay papered wall there were those pictures that pursued the homeless one from house to house. The Huguenot lovers, the first quarrel, the wedding breakfast, Psyche at the fountain. The mantel's chastely severe outline was ingloriously veiled behind some pert drapery, drawn rakishly askew like the sashes of the Amazonian ballet. Upon it was some desolate flotsam cast aside by the rooms marooned when a lucky sail had borne them to a fresh port. A trifling case of 2 pictures of actresses, a medicine bottle, some stray cards out of a deck. One by one, as the characters of the cryptograph become explicit, the little signs left by the furnished room's procession of guests developed a significance. The threadbare space in the rug in front of the dresser told that lovely woman had marched in the throng. Tiny fingerprints on the wall spoke of little prisoners trying to feel their way to the sun and air. A splattered stain rang like a shadow of bursting bomb witnessed where a hurled glass of bottle had splintered with its contents against the wall. Across the pier glass had been scrawled with a diamond in staggering letters the name Marie. It seemed that the succession of dwellers in the furnished room had turned in fury, perhaps tempted beyond forbearance by its garish coldness, and wreaked upon it their passions. The furniture was chipped and bruised, the couch distorted by bursting springs seemed a horrible monster that had been slain during the stress of some grotesque convulsion. Some more potent upheaval had cloven a great slice from the marble mantel. Each plank in the floor owned its particular cant and shriek as from a separate and individual agony. It seemed incredible that all this malice and injury had been wrought upon the room by those who called it for a time their home. And yet it may have been the cheated home instinct surviving blindly, the resentful rage at false household gods that had kindled their wrath. A hut that is our own we can sweep and adorn and cherish. The young tenant in the chair allowed these thoughts to file soft-shod through his mind while there drifted into the room furnished sounds and furnished scents. He heard in one room a tittering and incontinent slack laughter, in others the monologue of a scold, the rattling of dice, a lullaby, and one crying duly. Above him a banjo tinkled with spirit, doors banged somewhere, the elevated trains roared intermittently, a cat yelled miserably upon a back fence, and he breathed the breath of the house, a dank savor rather than a smell, a cold, musty effluvium as from underground vaults mingled with the reeking exhalations of linoleum and mildewed and rotten woodwork. Then, suddenly, as he rested there, the room was filled with the strong, sweet odor of mignonette. It came as upon a single buffet of wind, with such sureness and fragrance and emphasis that it almost seemed a living visitant. And the man cried aloud, "What, dear?" as if he had been called, and sprang up and faced about. The rich odor clung to him and wrapped him around. He reached out his arms for it, all his senses from the time confused and commingled. How could one be peremptorily called by an odor? Surely it must have been a sound, but was it not the sound that had touched, that had caressed him? "She has been in this room," he cried, and sprang to wrest from it a token, for he knew he would recognize the smallest thing that had belonged to her, or that she had touched. This envelope scent of mignonette, the odor that she had loved and made her own. Whence came it? The room had been but carelessly set in order. Scattered upon the flimsy dresser scarf were half a dozen hairpins, those discreet, indistinguishable friends of womankind, feminine of gender, infinite of mood, and uncommunicative of tints. These he ignored, conscious of their triumphant lack of identity. Ransacking the drawers of the dresser, he came upon a discarded tiny ragged handkerchief. He pressed it to his face. It was racy and insolent with heliotrope. He hurled it to the floor. In another drawer he found odd buttons, a theater program, a pawnbroker's card, 2 lost marshmallows, a book on the divination of dreams. And the last was a woman's black satin hair bow, which halted him, poised between ice and fire. The black satin hair bow also is femininity's demure, impersonal, common ornament, and tells no tales. And then he traversed the room like a hound on the scent, skimming the walls, considering the corners of the bulging matting on his hands and knees, rummaging mantel and tables. The curtains and hangings and drunken cabinet in the corner were a visible sign, unable to perceive that she was there beside, around, against, within, above him, clinging to him, wooing him, calling him so poignantly through the finer senses that even his grosser ones became cognizant of the call. Once again he answered loudly, "Yes, dear?" and turned wild-eyed to gaze on vacancy, for he could not yet discern form and color and love in outstretched arms and the odor of mignonette. O God, whence that odor? And since when had odors had a voice to call? Thus he groped. He burrowed in crevices and corners and found corks and cigarettes. These he passed in passive content. But once he found in a fold of the matting a half-smoked cigar, and this he ground beneath his heel with a green and trenchant oath. He sifted the room from end to end. He found jury and ignoble small records of many a peripatetic tenant. But of her whom he sought, and who may have lodged there, and whose spirit seemed to hover there, he found no trace. And then he thought of the housekeeper. He ran from the haunted room downstairs to a door that showed a crack of light. She came out to his knock. He smothered his excitement as best he could. "Will you tell me, madam," he besought her, "who occupied the room I have before I came?" "Yes, sir, I could tell you again. 'Twas Sprowls and Mooney, as I said, Miss Beretta Sprowls. It was in the theaters, but Miss Mooney she was. My house is well known for respectability. A marriage certificate hung, framed, and a nail over. What kind of a lady was Miss Sprowls, in looks, I mean?" "Why, black-haired, sir, short and stout, with a comical face. They left a week ago, Tuesday." "And before they occupied it?" "Why, there was a single gentleman connected with the draying business. He left owing me a week. Before him was Mrs. Crowder and her 2 children that stayed 4 months, and back of them was old Mr. Doyle, whose sons paid for him. He kept the room for 6 months. That goes back a year, sir. And further, I do not remember." He thanked her and crept back to his room. The room was dead. The essence that had vivified it was gone. The perfume of mignonette had departed. In its place was the old stale odor of moldy house furniture, of atmosphere and storage. The ebbing of his hope drained his faith. He sat staring at the yellow, singing gaslight. Soon he walked to the bed and began to tear the sheets into strips. With the blade of his knife, he drove them tightly into every crevice around windows and door. When all was snug and taut, he turned out the light, turned the gas full on again, and laid himself gratefully upon the bed. It was Mrs. McCool's night to go with a can for beer, so she fetched it and sat with Mrs. Purdy in one of those subterranean retreats where housekeepers foregather and the worm dieth seldom. "I rented out my third floor back this evening," said Miss Purdy across a fine circle of foam. "A young man took it. He went up to bed 2 hours ago." "Now did ye, Miss Purdy, ma'am," said Mrs. McCool, with intense admiration. "You do be a wonder for renting rooms of that kind. And did ye tell him then?" she concluded in a husky whisper, laden with mystery. "Rooms," said Mrs. Purdy in her furriest tones, "are furnished for to rent. I did not tell him, Mrs. McCool." "'Tis right ye are, ma'am. 'Tis by renting rooms we kape alive. Ye have the real sense for business, ma'am. There be many people will reject the rentin' of a room if they be told a suicide has been after dying in the bed of it. As you say, we has our living to be making," remarked Mrs. Purdy. "Yes, ma'am, 'tis true. 'Tis just 1 week ago this day I helped ye lay out the third floor back. A pretty slip of a colleen she was to be killing herself wid the gas. A sweet little face she had, Mrs. Purdy, ma'am." "She'd have been called handsome, as you say," said Miss Purdy, assenting but critical, "but for that mole she had a growin' by her left eyebrow. Fill up her glass again, Mrs. McCool." The Man Upstairs by Ray Bradbury. He remembered how carefully and expertly grandmother would fondle the cold-cut guts of the chicken and withdraw the marvels therein. The wet, shining loops of meat, smelling intestine, the muscled lump of heart, the gizzard with the collection of seeds in it. How neatly and nicely Grandma would slit the chicken and push her fat little hand in to deprive it of its metals. These would be segregated, some in pans of water, others in paper to be thrown to the dog later, perhaps. And then the ritual of taxidermy, stuffing the bird with watered, seasoned bread, and performing surgery with a swift, bright needle, stitch after pull-tight stitch. This was one of the prime thrills of Douglas' 11-year-old lifespan. Altogether, he counted 20 knives in the various squeaking drawers of the magic kitchen table from which Grandma, a kindly, gentle-faced, white-haired old witch, drew paraphernalia for her miracles. Douglas was to be quiet, stand across the table from Grandma, his freckled nose tucked over the edge, watching, but any loose boy talk might interfere with the spell. It was a wonder when Grandma brandished silver shakers over the bird, supposedly sprinkling showers of mummy dust and pulverized Indian bones, muttering mystical verses under her toothless breath. "Grammy," said Douglas at last, breaking the silence, "am I like that inside?" He pointed at the chicken. "Yes," said Grandma. "A little more orderly and presentable, but just about the same." "And more of it?" added Douglas, proud of his guts. "Yes," said Grandma, "more of it. Grandpa has lots more'n me. His sticks out in front so he can rest his elbows on it." Grandma laughed and shook her head. Douglas said, "And Lucy Williams down the street, hush, child," cried Grandma, "but she's got—" "Never you mind what she's got. That's different." "But why is she different?" "A darned needle dragonfly is coming by some day and sew up your mouth," said Grandma firmly. Douglas waited the nest. "How do you know I've got insides like that, Grandma?" "Oh, go away now." front doorbell rang. Through the front door glass as he ran down the hall, Douglas saw a straw hat. The bell jangled again and again. Douglas opened the door. "Morning, child. Is the landlady at home?" Cold gray eyes and a long, smooth, walnut-colored face gazed upon Douglas. The man was tall, thin, and carried a suitcase, a briefcase, an umbrella under one bent arm, gloves rich and thick and gray on his thin fingers, and wore a horribly new straw hat. Douglas backed up. "She's busy. I wish to rent her upstairs room as advertised. We've got 10 boarders and it's already rented. Go away." "Douglas." Grandma was behind him suddenly. "How do you do?" she said to the stranger. "Never mind this child." Unsmiling, the man stepped stiffly in. Douglas watched them ascend out of sight up the stairs, heard Grandma detailing the conveniences of the upstairs room. Soon she hurried down to pile linens from the linen closet on Douglas and send him scooting up with them. Douglas paused at the room's threshold. The room was changed oddly, simply because the stranger had been in it a moment. The straw hat lay brittle and terrible upon the bed. The umbrella leaned itself stiff against one wall, like a dead bat with dark wings folded. Douglas blinked at the umbrella. The stranger stood in the center of the changed room, tall. "Here." Douglas littered the bed with supplies. "We eat at noon sharp, and if you're late coming down, the soup will get cold. Grandma fixes it so it will, every time." The tall, strange man counted out 10 new copper pennies and tinkled them in Douglas's blouse pocket. "We shall be friends," he said grimly. It was funny, the man having nothing but pennies, lots of them, no silver at all, no dimes, no quarters, just new copper pennies. Douglas thanked him glumly. "I'll drop these in the dime bank when I get them changed into a dime. I got $6.50 in dimes already for my camp trip in August." "I must wash now," said the tall, strange man. Once at midnight, Douglas wakened to hear a storm rumbling outside. The cold, hard wind shaking the house, the rain driving against the window, and then a lightning bolt had landed outside the window with a silent, terrific concussion. He remembered that fear of looking about at his room, seeing it strange and awful in the instantaneous light. So it was, now, in this room. He stood looking up at the stranger. This room was no longer the same, but changed indefinably, because this man, quick as a lightning bolt, had shed his light about it. Douglas backed up slowly as the stranger advanced. The door closed in his face. The wooden fork went up with mashed potatoes, came down empty. Mr. Coberman, for that was his name, had brought the wooden fork and wooden knife and spoon with him when Grandma called lunch. "Mrs. Spaulding," he said quietly, "my own cutlery. Please use it. I will have lunch today, but from tomorrow on, only breakfast and supper." Grandma bustled in and out, bearing steaming tureens of soup and beans and mashed potatoes to impress her new boarder, while Douglas sat rattling his silverware on his plate because he had discovered it irritated Mr. Coberman. "I know a trick," said Douglas. "Watch." He picked a fork tine with his fingernail. He pointed at various sectors of the table like a magician. Wherever he pointed, the sound of the vibrating fork tine emerged like a metal elfin voice. Simply done, of course, he pressed the fork handle on the tabletop secretly. The vibration from the wood like a sounding board. It looked quite magical. "There, and there!" exclaimed Douglas, happily plucking the fork again. He pointed at Mr. Coberman's soup, and the noise came from it. Mr. Coberman's walnut face became hard and firm and awful. He pushed the soup bowl away violently. His lips twisted. He fell back in his chair. Grandma appeared. "Why, what's wrong, Mr. Coberman?" "I cannot eat this soup." "Why?" "Because I am full and can eat no more, thank you." Mr. Coberman left the room glaring. "What did you do just then?" asked Grandma at Douglas sharply. "Nothing, Grandma. Why does he eat with wooden spoons?" "Yours not to question. When do you go back to school anyway?" 7 weeks. "Oh, my land," said Grandma. Mr. Coberman worked nights. Each morning at 8 he arrived mysteriously home, devoured a very small breakfast, and then slept soundlessly in his room all through the dreaming hot daytime, until the huge supper with all the other boarders at night. Mr. Coberman's sleeping habits made it necessary for Douglas to be quiet. This was unbearable, so whenever Grandma visited down the street, Douglas stomped up and down stairs beating a drum, bouncing golf balls, or just screaming for 3 minutes outside Mr. Coberman's door, or flushing the toilet 7 times in succession. Mr. Coberman never moved. His room was silent, dark. He did not complain. There was no sound. He slept on and on. It was very strange. Douglas felt a pure white flame of hatred burn inside himself with a steady, unflickering beauty. Now that room was Coberman land. Once it had been flowery bright when Miss Sadlow lived there. Now it was stark bare, cold, clean, everything in its place, alien and brittle. Douglas climbed upstairs on the 4th morning. Halfway to the 2nd floor was a large, sun-filled window framed by 6-inch panes of orange, purple, blue, red, and burgundy glass. The inside enchanted early mornings when the sun fell through the strike and landing and slide down the stair banister. Douglas stood entranced at his window, peering at the world through the multicolored panes. Now a blue world, now a blue sky, blue people, blue streetcars, and blue trotting dogs. He shifted panes, now an amber world. 2 lemonish women glided by, resembling the daughters of Fu Manchu. Douglas giggled. This pane made even the sunlight more purely golden. It was about 8 a.m. Mr. Coberman strolled by below on the sidewalk, returning from his night's work. His umbrella looped over his elbow, straw hat glued to his head with patent oil. Douglas shifted panes again. Mr. Coberman was a red man walking through a red world with red trees and red flowers and something else. Something about Mr. Coberman. Douglas squinted. The red glass did things to Mr. Coberman. His face, his suit, his hands, the clothes seemed to melt away. Douglas almost believed for one terrible instant that he could see inside Mr. Coberman, and what he saw made him lean wildly against the small red pane, blinking. Mr. Coberman glanced up just then, saw Douglas, and raised his umbrella angrily as if to strike. He ran swiftly across the red lawn to the front door. "Young man," he cried, running up the stairs, "what were you doing?" "Just looking," said Douglas numbly. "That's all, is it?" cried Mr. Coberman. "Yes, sir, I look through all the glasses, all kinds of worlds, blue ones, red ones, yellow ones, all different." "What kinds of worlds is it?" Mr. Coberman glanced at the little panes of glass, his face pale. He got hold of himself. He wiped his face with a handkerchief and pretended to laugh. "Yes, all kinds of worlds, all different." He walked to the door of his room. "Go right ahead. Play," he said. The door closed. The hall was empty. Mr. Coberman had gone in. Douglas shrugged and found a new pane. "Oh, everything's violet." Half an hour later, while playing in his sandbox behind the house, Douglas heard the crash and the shattering tinkle. He leaped up. A moment later, Grandma appeared in the back porch, the old razor strop trembling in her hand. "Douglas, I told you time and again never fling your basketball against the house. Oh, I could just cry. I've been sitting right here, he protested. Come see what you've done, you nasty boy. The great colored window panes lay shattered in a rainbow chaos in the upstairs landing. His basketball lay in the ruins. Before he could even begin telling his innocence, Douglas was struck with a dozen stinging blows upon his rump. Wherever he landed, screaming, the razor's stroke struck again. Later, hiding his mind in the sand pile like an ostrich, Douglas nursed his dreadful pains. He knew who'd thrown that basketball. A man with a straw hat and a stiff umbrella in a cold gray room. Yeah. He dribbled tears. Just wait. Just wait. He heard Grandma sweeping up the broken glass. She brought it out and threw it in the trash bin. Blue, pink, yellow meteors of glass dropped brightly down. When she was gone, Douglas dragged himself whimpering over to save out 3 pieces of the incredible glass. Mr. Coberman disliked the colored windows. These, he clinked them in his fingers, would be worth saving. Grandfather arrived from his newspaper office each night, shortly ahead of the other boarders, at 5 o'clock. When a slow, heavy tread filled the hall and a thick mahogany cane thumped on the cane rack, Douglas ran to embrace the large stomach and sit on Grandpa's knee while he read the evening paper. Hi, Grandpa. Hello down there. Grandma cut chickens again today. It's fun watching, said Douglas. Grandpa kept reading. That's twice this week, chickens. She's the chickenest woman. You like to watch her cut 'em, huh? Cold-blooded little pepper, huh? I'm just curious. You are, rumbled Grandpa, scowling. Remember that day when that young lady was killed at the rail station? You just walked over and looked at her, blood and all. He laughed. Queer duck. Stay that way. Fear nothing ever in your life. I guess you get it from your father, him being a military man and all, and you so close to him before you came here to live last year. Grandpa returned to his paper. A long pause. Gramps? Yes? What if a man didn't have a heart or lungs or stomach, but still walked around alive? That, mumbled Gramps, would be a miracle. I don't mean a miracle. I mean, what if he was all different inside, not like me? Well, he wouldn't be quite human then, would he, boy? It's not, Gramps. Gramps, you got a heart and lungs. Gramps chuckled. Well, tell the truth, I don't know. Never seen them. Never had an x-ray. Never been to a doctor. Might as well be a potato salad for all I know. Have I got a stomach? You certainly have, cried Grandma from the parlor entry, because I feed it. And you've lungs, you scream loud enough to wake the crumbles. And you've dirty hands, go wash them. Dinner's ready. Grandpa, come on, Douglas, get. In the rush of boarders streaming downstairs, Grandpa, if he intended questioning Douglas further about the weird conversation, lost his opportunity. Dinner delayed, an instant more, Grandma and the potatoes would develop simultaneous lumps. The boarders, laughing and talking at the table, Mr. Coberman silent and sullen among them, were silenced when Grandfather cleared his throat. He talked politics a few minutes, then shifted over into the intriguing topic of the recent peculiar deaths in the town. It's enough to make an old newspaper editor prick up his ears, he said, eyeing them all. That young Miss Larson lived across the ravine now. Found her dead 3 days ago for no reason. Just funny kinds of tattoos all over her and a facial expression that would make Dante cringe. And that other young lady, what was her name? Whiteley? She disappeared and never did come back. Them things happen all the time, said Miss Britz, the garage mechanic, chewing. Ever peek in a missing people bureau file? It's that long. He illustrated. Can't tell what happens to most of them. Anyone want more dressing? Grandma ladled liberal portions from the chicken's interior. Douglas watched, thinking about how that chicken had had two kinds of guts, God-made and man-made. Well, how about three kinds of guts? Why not? Conversation continued about the mysterious death of so-and-so, and oh yes, remember a week ago, Marion Versumian died of heart failure? Maybe that didn't connect up, or did it? You're crazy, forget it. Why talk about it at the dinner table, so? Never can tell, said Mr. Britz. Maybe we got a vampire in town. Mr. Coberman stopped eating. In the year 1927, said Grandma. Vampire? Oh, go on now. Sure, said Mr. Britz. Kill him with silver bullets. Anything silver for that matter. Vampires hate silver. I read it in a book somewhere once. Sure I did. Douglas looked at Mr. Coberman, who ate with wooden knives and forks and carried only new copper pennies in his pocket. It's poor judgment, said Grandpa, to call anything by a name. We don't know what a hobgoblin or a vampire or a troll is. It could be lots of things. You can't heave them into categories with labels and say they'll act one way or another. That'd be silly. They're people. People who do things. Yes, that's the way to put it. People who do things. Excuse me, said Mr. Coberman, who got up and went out for his evening walk to work. The stars and the moon, the wind, the clock ticking, and the chiming of the hours into dawn. The sun rising, and here it was another morning, another day, and Mr. Coberman coming along the sidewalk from his night's work. Douglas stood off like a small mechanism, wearing and watching with carefully microscopic eyes. At noon, Grandma went to the store to buy groceries. As was his custom every day when Grandma was gone, Douglas yelled outside Mr. Coberman's door for a full 3 minutes. As usual, there was no response. The silence was horrible. He ran downstairs, got the passkey, a silver fork, and the 3 pieces of colored glass he had saved from the shattered window. He fitted the key to the lock and swung the door slowly open. The room was in half light, the shades drawn. Mr. Coberman lay atop his bed covers in slumber clothes, breathing gently up and down. He didn't move. His face was motionless. Hello, Mr. Coberman. Colorless walls echoed the man's regular breathing. Mr. Coberman, hello! Bouncing a golf ball, Douglas advanced. He yelled, still no answer. Mr. Coberman? Bending over Mr. Coberman, Douglas picked the tines of the silver fork in the sleeping man's face. Mr. Coberman winced. He twisted. He groaned bitterly. Response. Good. Swell. Douglas drew a piece of blue glass from his pocket. Looking through the blue glass fragment, he found himself in a blue room, in a blue world different from the world he knew. As different as was the red world. Blue furniture, blue bed, blue ceiling and blue walls, blue wooden eating utensils atop a blue bureau, and the sullen dark blue of Mr. Coberman's face and arms, his blue chest rising, falling also. Mr. Coberman's eyes were wide, staring at him with a hungry darkness. Douglas fell back, pulled the blue glass from his eyes. Mr. Coberman's eyes were shut. Blue glass again, open. Blue glass away, shut. Blue glass again, open. Away, shut. Funny. Douglas experimented, trembling. Through the glass, the eyes seemed to peer hungrily, avidly through Mr. Coberman's closed lids. Without the blue glass, they seemed tightly shut. But it was the rest of Mr. Coberman's body. Mr. Coberman's bedclothes dissolved off him. The blue glass had something to do with it, or perhaps it was the clothes themselves just being on Mr. Coberman. Douglas cried out. He was looking through the wall of Mr. Coberman's stomach, right inside him. Mr. Coberman was solid, or nearly so anyway. There were strange shapes and sizes within him. Douglas must have stood amazed for 5 minutes thinking about the blue worlds, the red worlds, the yellow worlds side by side living together like glass panes around the big white stair window. Side by side, the colored panes, the different worlds, Mr. Coberman had said so himself. So, this was why the colored window had been broken. "Mr. Coberman, wake up!" No answer. "Mr. Coberman, where do you work at night? Mr. Coberman, where do you work?" A little breeze stirred the blue window shade. In a red world or a green world or a yellow one. "Mr. Coberman?" Over everything was a blue glass silence. "Wait there," said Douglas. He walked down to the kitchen, pulled open the great squeaking drawer, and picked out the sharpest, biggest knife. Very calmly he walked into the hall, climbed back up the stairs again, opened the door to Mr. Coberman's room, went in, and closed it, holding the sharp knife in one hand. Well, we're gonna shut it down right there. And it's in a good portion of the story where there's, a grand pause and then on to the next portion of the story. But yeah, it's been pretty good so far, and we're almost done. I don't know how many pages we have left, but I can barely see them. Thank you so much once again for hanging out with me tonight. It was my pleasure hanging out and entertaining you. Thank you to all my friends out there, wherever you may be listening, Beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow night. I don't know. I'm throwing it around. I might do story time again, but that seemed to take forever because I had to keep pausing and blowing my nose and coughing and stuff. But it might be better than doing that during trippy TikToks, Don't forget, you guys, we are all in this together. Together, we can make the world better, and together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. I hope life is treating you well and things aren't too hard for you, and just remember, there's always tomorrow. Nighty night, love and light. Take care of my yous. I will see you back here tomorrow night. Same crazy time, same crazy place. Also, feel free to mail me or email me your ghost stories or paranormal or supernatural experiences to P.O. Box 663, Bayfield, Colorado, 81122. Nighty night.